Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the WooCommerce by Websync webinar for Reckon Partners. My name is Vicky and I'll be hosting today's webinar. Today's session will run for approximately half an hour with time for questions at the end. Questions can be submitted at any time in the question box on the webinar's control panel. Our presenter today is Mike Pierotti. Mike is head developer and founder of Websync with 20 years dev experience. I'll now hand you over to Mike for today's presentation.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you for that introduction. As mentioned in there, my name is Mike and I am the founder and lead developer of Websync. I've been developing in this space for a long time now. I hate to say my age, but so this is exclusively what we do. So we understand all the ins and outs of this sort of stuff. So today we'll be talking about Reckon accounts and WooCommerce. We've just chosen WooCommerce as it is a fairly common e-commerce platform. It's the one we get requested for most across not only Reckon but other platforms too. We do support a few others. Shopify is fairly popular too, and we do, however, add new ones all the time. So we're just looking at a couple of others like BigCommerce and 3D Car is another one that's been requested. However, today we're talking about WooCommerce. So what does the Websync integration between Reckon accounts and WooCommerce do? So we'll run through a few things, just who is it for, what it does, and then we'll get into a demonstration around the basics of what it does, the setup, and how it works. So firstly, who is it for? It's online retailers, essentially. Anyone's got a WooCommerce store is selling something online. So that is who it caters for. Having said that though, there are existing Reckon accounts hosted clients who might be your clients that have the ability to sell online, but they simply don't, or they want to move into that space. So we really do cater for both. It's one of those things that you don't have to be Amazon to be running something like this. If you're doing 5 transactions a month, that hits our free tier, so that's perfectly fine to do as well. Anything that can save someone time, we're interested in. The one that we do have a lot of inquiries from is bookkeepers and accountants who might have an existing client base or just one client who has either got an online store and needs to sync it to Reckon, or they can see the need for the client to move online and is looking for different ways of sort of helping them out with that transition, as well as streamlining things and basically giving more value to the client base and that sort of thing. So why Websync? There's a few things. Time saving. So we're all very aware of the time saving of double handling, well, the time suck that double handling causes. The one that people miss most though is they say, oh, look, I can enter an invoice, it's only 30 seconds or whatever. It's the mistake fixing that is the real hidden time vampire, let's say, because trying to reconcile something that's a few cents out is always a real pain, going back through finding where it was, especially if that's done once a week or once a fortnight, something like that, and there's a lot of transactions. So that is a real problem. But with Websync, it's a one-to-one, every cent matches, so you've got no problems there. It is a set and forget system. Once it's set up, it just runs in the background, it does its thing, and there's no real need for anyone to be involved. It runs on a timer, so you, once an hour or 4 hours or 8 hours or 12 hours depending on your needs. The only time you really need to get in there and do any maintenance is when something in Reckon changes, really. If you've got a new tax code or you want to change a customer where it syncs, which I'll show you shortly. Something that we pride ourselves on as well is the onboarding, and this is for anyone and everyone. So this can be for the end user, this can be for a bookkeeper, this can be an accountant, a partner, it doesn't really matter. We understand that everyone has a different level of technical expertise. While this isn't difficult, it is new territory for a lot of people. We do this day in and day out, so for me, second nature. However, I do understand, new things can be hard to sort of do sometimes. So we do offer full onboarding. That is from setting up the connection to, say, WooCommerce, setting up Reckon accounts, and then actually all the parameters of the sync. We can do it all. We can guide, we can offer advice. It really depends on the client and the requirement there. So, some people kind of get it straight away and they're into it. They've done something similar before. Other people, really do need the guidance. We're happy to do both. One thing we've decided on as well is simplified pricing. There's solutions out there in different areas that do per transaction and this and that, and you need get your calculator out and work out how much you're going to be up for this month versus last month, or you need a degree in something to work it out. We've just got 2 price tiers, 1 or 3, actually a free one, so 10 transactions or less, free, don't have to pay, free forever. Between 10 and 100 is 29 a month, and then 49 for anything over. So there's no per transaction cost, and we also don't count syncing inventory or anything like that as a transaction. It's purely orders only. So kind of like trying to be very fair on that. So there's a saving that you can pass on to clients. And then basically we just want to make it easy to connect your platform. So if that's onboarding, or if that's adding in new wizards or anything like that, we're constantly developing the product. It's something that we really want to make the experience as easy as possible for our clients. So that's what we're really all about. That's our mission. So what does the integration do? I'll just touch on some points here before I just jump in and show you the nuts and bolts of it. So obviously we're syncing between Reckon and WooCommerce. So what we do is, the main one that everyone comes to us for is orders. So an order is created in, let's say WooCommerce in this case, and it is synced into Reckon. The key here is matching different elements, but we also match the freight as well, which is something that seems to be a tough one for some reason. Not for us. We map our tax codes as well. So we've actually pulled those tax codes out of Reckon, and we use those, which is something as well that I keep hearing that is a bugbear of syncing, let's say. We also do inventory updates too. So outside of orders, it can be a real pain. Just, if you change something in, say, Reckon, and you want that price or description or quantity really to go into your other system or systems, jumping in and out of things is a bit of a pain. However, we can also automate that. And also we can automate setting up clients. So when a new order is created, we've got an option to create a new client on the fly, and it will test if that client exists already. And if they don't, we can set up a new client. So this is really handy for people that do want all their online customers in their Reckon file. You might, if the repeat customers, etc., you can get that history. Having said that, if that's not a concern, then you can just use a generic customer, which I will show you. And there is a new inventory item sync as well. So, if something is set up in a system, it can sync through. Now this one here is nothing is mandatory in our sync, but this is one, it's a bit of a 50-50. Some people might have thousands of items in Reckon, and they only want, say, 100 to go to WooCommerce. So understand, not for everyone. However, there is no one's forced to use it. As I said earlier, it runs at set intervals. We are just releasing some new shorter ones, but currently it's 1 hour, 4 hours, 8 hours, and 12 hours. We've just got some requirements for some high transaction warehouses that need it every 20 minutes. So we're just adding in the 20 and 30 minutes as options too. Obviously, we just got to make sure it doesn't overload any system. So we're just running that at the moment. So far, so good. So we should have that sort of end of the week released. We got detailed logging too. So this is one that, really not a huge amount of people need this, but we do have the high level logging that will just show, what has synced when it synced, what the, the source information was and what the destination ID was. But further to that, if you do need detailed logging, we have that too. So you can actually see step by step the transaction ID and all sorts of things like that. This is more for us so we can actually keep track of what's happening, which also gives us any idea if there's any failures. However, I will just touch on why we do have a fairly low failure rate, and that's to do with how we've set up our sync. And I do want to touch on the onboarding again, because this is really important. It is at no extra cost, the onboarding, and our main concern is getting customers syncing as quickly as possible. It's one of those things that this is what we do, so this is what we want to do, and we want to do it well. So, if that means as a partner you're sending customers to us and we're doing it, or we're doing it on your behalf with you, however that works, we're happy to do that. At the end of the day, customer service is pretty much a very strong point of what we do. So that's it for our little presentation. I'll just jump into the system now. So it is web-based. So anyone can sign up, that's fine. Now for partners, I will touch on what we do for partners if you do want to bring multiple clients on. So basically we just got all our sign up here. I won't actually sign up, but email address, all that sort of stuff, business name. Here we do have an option to say what we are connecting. The reason we do this is just because we do have a wizard that does help a customer through the process. However, we do have a little thing here that says, do you want us to help you? Everyone ticks yes, because it's free. Password, and then we create the account. Once it creates the account, then we simply log in. So I'll just log in with the one we set up for the demonstration before. Okay, so once we've logged in, so this is a new account. So what we've got here is our daily syncs for the month. Obviously we got none, this is new. We've got 0 connections used, 0 of 1. You can have multiple connections. So if you do want to say connect 2 or 3 different web shops, and that can be a combination of WooCommerce, Shopify, anything else into one Reckon file, you certainly can do that. That's no problem. We don't have any syncs done, and we've had no transactions this month. What we do have here though is our little robot. He's our wizard, I suppose, robot wizard. And we've got our options here. So there's obviously several options, but we're interested in WooCommerce and Reckon. These are the only wizards we have at the moment. We're adding these often. So, ones like Shopify, etc. But for now, we'll just concentrate on this one. So basically, this will just step us through the process, which I won't do because I will show it step by step. This is not mandatory as well. You can just say no thanks. But so all we would do as a client is to start this off is put our WooCommerce address. It'll step us through the authorization process there, and then it'll move us over to Reckon accounts hosted and that OAuth 2 workflow. So instead of doing the wizard, we will just do it manually because we already do have the WooCommerce set up. Again, that's quite an easy. We can just check that. Just has to connect a second, and we can see it's connected successfully. So that's all good. So from there, that's our source data. So we need 2 connections, one being our web store and the second being Reckon. So we do have a whole bunch of different options here. So for this particular one, I'm going to say Reckon, and I'm just going to give it a name. So we'll just add that. Once we've added that in, it just takes us to our connection page or our settings page, so we can modify these at any time. But for now, I want to connect to Reckon. So this just takes me to my OAuth process. Now I have already logged in for a demonstration we did half an hour ago, so it won't show me the login, but it just brings me back to Websync, and now it says we are connected to Reckon, the account's hosted. If you have more than one company file, it is all listed here. This is something that we, again, anytime we can get data from Reckon to make selections easy, we do. So file names is a tough one sometimes, you know, slashes, all that sort of stuff. Do I put a space, no space? So we just make that easy. Then we just do need access to to the company file, which I just have to put in that password. And then we have a company file version here. I'm on 2020, so I'll just save that. So basically, once it's saved, it reloads and we can see our data is saved there. So now if I come back to our connection manager, we've got our 2 connections here. We can have as many connections as we like. So let's say we did have a second store and it was Shopify, we can add that in, or a Squarespace, OpenCart, those sorts of things as well. For this demonstration, we'll keep it simple. So once we've done that, we come to our sync manager. The sync manager is where we define how we connect our 2 data sources, well, our data source and our endpoint. If we had multiple connections here, it would show up. For this one, quite straightforward. I want to connect my Woo and my Ra. This is the name I gave it, so not very descriptive, but we get the idea. So we just create a new one here. And what we do is it just comes in, and now we've got our connection here. So we've got some drop downs here and we've got some options. So obviously the connection is not active by default, but we've got when an order is created in WooCommerce, we want to send it to Reckon, so we can tick that on, sync the inventory, and when an item is created in WooCommerce, do we send it to Reckon? I'll just touch on that one later. There's a bit more info coming on that one. So with this sort of, with anything here, we just need a few things for the system to know what to trigger. So with WooCommerce, we've got a couple of order statuses that we concentrate on: processed and completed. Processing is generally when the order has been paid for, but it hasn't been dispatched yet, and completed is generally when it's been completed. So whatever suits the workflow best. There is no right answer on this. However, you know, processing is probably a good indication, or so completed is probably a good indication that it's been fulfilled correctly. So that's probably a good one, but again, that's up to each company. So we'll just select completed here. What we've got here as far as how the order gets sent with the customer type, we can either use an existing code or we can create a customer on the fly. So if we do create a customer, it just says it will check first to see if the first name and last name equals a full name in Reckon, and if it does that email address also match what's with that customer? If it does, it's considered a match and it will use that. Otherwise, it'll create a new customer with the information provided in WooCommerce. So that's, you know, name, address, email, and phone number when it's supplied. If we do say, look, I don't want, you know, I've got a high traffic and I don't want all these one-time customers in my Reckon file, that makes sense too. So we just use an existing code, and we can see here we've got all these different codes in a drop down. Now, this is a drop down because this is real-time information straight out of Reckon. The reason we do that is because if I was to type my customer is online Woo, it leaves it open to make mistakes. So configuration mistakes is always what breaks a sync. So anytime we can make it a drop down and easy as possible, we do. So this is an example here. We've got all these test ones from the test Reckon file. So we'll select Woo. And this one here is just invoice, send Reckon order type as invoice. That's a bit of a hangover from other systems where we do invoices and orders, but you know, we'll just leave it as invoice for here. We do have an option here to say, do we want the WooCommerce invoice number as the Reckon invoice number? If we tick that, no problems. And if we are using that, we can also use a prefix on that. So WooCommerce order numbers, you know, could be like four numbers, you know, 1347, something like that. So this would just, you know, put Woo in front of it, Woo dash in front of it. Easy, just makes it easier to differentiate between orders and their source. So again, if you have another shop, you could even have Woo 1 or Woo 2 or whatever, or Shopify if it's a Shopify one, anything you like. However, you can also just say, you know what, let Reckon create the order, the invoice number too, for consistency's sake. So obviously there's going to be a freight component on a lot of online orders. So we do have a item here to select our shipping code. Again, this is information live from Reckon. So these are inventory items, these are non-inventory items. Obviously we've got no service charges or charge items in there. So I'm going to select freight here. Again, this comes back to not having to type in the word freight, because you know, maybe I thought it was freight, but in the system it's actually delivery or something like that, or you misspell it. So this just, again, takes out any of the guesswork, any of the things that can cause a sync to fail. Same goes, and this is a really important one, same goes with use codes for items not found. So what we do is we match stock from WooCommerce on the SKU or the name in WooCommerce. I recommend the SKU. If that SKU is not found in Reckon, well, that's going to cause an issue, because if you try and push an order into Reckon with a code that doesn't exist, it will be rejected. Okay, so that's a problem. So the fallback for this is to use use a code for items not found. Again, recommended to be a non-inventory item. So I've just got an item called non-stock. So anytime the system goes through and it finds, you know, 4 out of 5 items, but the 5th isn't, it'll just default back to this non-stock item. It'll use the description from WooCommerce. It will use the price from WooCommerce, so the order can be processed. Obviously, you know, there's ways to go and have a look at, you know, what are we selling on non-stock, and at that point you can the invoice if you need to, but more importantly, go and modify the WooCommerce SKU to ensure it doesn't happen again. That's if you're tracking inventory. If you don't want to track inventory at all, just set a non-stock code and everything will come through on that, and you don't even need to worry about the SKUs in WooCommerce. So that's one way of doing it as well. I recommend tracking inventory personally. Then we can just say, do our WooCommerce prices include tax? Something that is going to be released shortly as well is just more detailed tax mapping. We do see a lot of wet tax coming through. It seems to be, Reckon seems to be the choice for wet tax. So we do have a lot of wineries. So what we're going to do is accommodate a lot better wet versus GST. So you can actually map each individual tax code to a tax code in Reckon. That way it's a lot more precise. Again, we've got our drop down, which means you can't, you know, is it meant to be NCG or is it, you know, GST, whatever. It's always going to be exact because it is information direct from Reckon. It is live, so even if you were to come and say, I don't have my customer that I wanted up here, you can go into Reckon, you can enter it in, you refresh this page, and it's there straight away. So it's all real time. The only thing that is on a timer is the actual order sync. So we've got some options here as well around syncing inventory. Again, we just got to tell it what to match on. SKU is always recommended. Like everything with our system, it's all optional. So do we want to sync the pricing? Do we want to sync the description? Do we want to sync the quantity? Some might say yes to all three. Some might, you know, some people only need the quantity. The key here is we can also say which direction it goes from. So if we're sending, you know, pricing from Reckon into WooCommerce, you know, might not want a description, but again, we have the direction, and then we have, you know, quantity direction as well. So, you know, I always say Reckon should be your inventory source of truth, and that should reflect into WooCommerce. So this is very handy for not having overselling, especially if you're taking orders over the phone, or you've got, account customers that are also buying items that might be sold online. So this can be, online customers are very unforgiving for stock outages. So, this is a way of mitigating that. So we might only want to say, I just want to sync the quantity. So we just turn everything else on and we turn this on, and that's all we need to do. We do have an option to send WooCommerce items into Reckon. We are just turning this into a two-way sync at the moment. So this will change dramatically shortly. So basically this one, I'll just run through it quickly, but what type of inventory do we want to set up? Am I using the SKU as the Reckon list ID? We do need to specify the account and cost of good and asset accounts. These aren't drop downs at the moment because, like I said, we are just retooling this, but they will be drop downs, and we'll have the option to say from Reckon to WooCommerce or WooCommerce to Reckon to just basically tell us what direction that will go in. So if I save that, we just reload. If we can see it there, it's running across the top, but that's the system going into Reckon, authorizing the API and getting the data from the other system. We can see here it's just loading the data from Reckon. So there is a bit of back-end processing that needs to go on, so it just takes a moment. But once it goes through, that is all the data there. So like I said before, if there is anything that needs to be synced live, maybe a tax code missing or a non-stock code missing, you can enter it in, come in here and process it. Once this is all set up, we generally take a look at it just to make sure it's okay. We can make that connection active, and that'll start syncing on the next sync cycle. We've also got the logs here, which I'm going to just change into another file that just has some logs. Now, excuse this one. This is a test company that just has data everywhere. And so if I come into the logs, this just has to load a sec, get the logs from the server. But what we've got is some detailed logs here about the the date, the time, the sync type, the source, the reference, so we can see the source like WooCommerce order number, the destination reference, how many attempts it took. So this one here's failed. So, we need to test a lot of fails too. And then we've got our detailed logs here, not that anyone really ever needs it, but it just shows you the process of how the system works. We've got unique IDs, so that just gives us some traceability, so we can actually go back and check all that out. If you do have more than one sync, then the logs here just gives you an idea of all the syncs. So you can see here's all these web orders, all that sort of stuff, where it's going. There are some other different types of syncs for, say, payroll, more advanced payroll that we do support, that you can resend sometimes. Something else worth mentioning, we're just in the process of finishing off a WooCommerce to, WooCommerce and also Reckon to Google as well. It's not in my list there, that's all right. Which means you'll be able to export inventory lists, etc., out into a Google Sheet, make any edits, and then re-import that back in as well, which is not going to technically be a sync on its own. It'll just be part of it. So if you have a WooCommerce and RA sync, then you're entitled to the Google one as well. That's sort of a bit of an introductory offer we're going to be doing. From there, we'll see how we go. Now, for partners, if you do have clients that want to come on, but you want to bill through us, we do have some partner rates on that. We also have an introduction where you can have 5 seats for $5 each. So you can basically just subscribe and on-sell those for whatever you like. So I won't get into too much about that now. I'm more about showing you what it can do. However, that's sort of my time, nearly to the minute. So hopefully you got some questions. Hammer me about anything you like, pricing, features, what's coming up, what we can, what we can't do. But for now, I'll hand you back over to Vicky. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. We've just got one question through. Can you select EXP tax codes for customers from outside Australia?
So the tax codes come from, if I understand the question correctly, the tax codes come from Reckon itself, sorry, I should say. So I'll just let this data sync up with Reckon. So the ones you saw there, there's GST, NCG, all that sort of stuff. That is, I've got a Reckon Australia account, so it's just by default has those codes. So if your Reckon file has other tax codes, then no problem. It'll be in here. Conversely, with our the tax mapping we're about to release, if it's in WooCommerce, it'll appear in a drop-down. And if it appears in Reckon, it'll appear in the drop-down as well. So I think to answer the question, if I understand it, is a short yes, and that's the explanation behind it.
Thank you. And that's the end of the questions.
Okay.
So thank you, Mike, for presenting today, and thank you all for attending. If you'd like a copy of the recording, please email us at training@reckon.com. And if you do have any further questions, please also email me and I'll forward those on to Mike. Okay, thank you all and have a lovely day.
No worries. Thank you.